Hello everyone, the Instant Camera Guy here, and welcome to an episode all about motors. See, I was in the process of assembling some cameras, which I will be selling eventually, out of spare parts. This is one that is a combination of Model 3 and SX-70 Model 1 combined into this kind of panda color scheme. And while I was in the process of that, I thought, do you know what? This would be a great time to talk about the different kinds of motors that are found on SX-70s. Because I have a present for you all. In today's episode, I'm going to tell you all about where you can source brand new replacement motors or have me upgrade your camera with a brand spanking new replacement should your motor be not as good as it used to be. Now, SX-70 cameras came with three main types of motors. There is a fourth kind, which I'll talk about in just a second, but classic SX-70 cameras came from the factory with three different types of motors. The first motor that we have here is the kind found on the SX-70 Model 1 and quite a few Model 2s, but typically on the Model 1. You can tell it's a Model 1 style motor because the terminals that exit the motor come out of the rear, and the sort of brass colored housing is uniform the entire way around. So it's actually possible to remove that housing and put it on upside down, and doing so will actually spin the motor in the reverse direction. So you have to be very careful if you're disassembling one of these that you don't put it in the wrong way. I believe the motor shaft is 2.5 millimeters in diameter. And these are probably the most common motors that you'll find in bad condition. Why that's the case, I don't exactly know, but I think it's to do with the quality of the carbon brushes. Now, it's not to say that every single SX-70 Model 1 will be in bad condition, in terms of the motor, because that's certainly not the case. But I tend to find that overwhelmingly the odds are that it's this kind of motor that's in bad condition. Now, I pioneered a technique that refurbishes these motors, so typically I never need to replace them, but every now and again the technique that I use to refurbish them just doesn't cut the mustard. It only helps so much, and within a few weeks the camera goes back to its old trick. So these are probably the types of motors that I end up replacing the most. Now, if you're wondering what that trick is that I'm referring to, basically you can go watch like any of my other SX-70 videos, but it basically involves unclipping the housing, removing the rotor from the inside of the motor, and installing this bit onto a drill like so, and then basically using the drill like a lathe, put it in reverse, and I use some sandpaper to sand the edge of the rotor there, the little copper part, to sand that back to pure copper to remove any oxidization and carbon buildup that may have occurred over time. I'm not going to do that in this video. You guys have seen me do that 8,000 times by now. I do it every single time I refurbish a camera. So that's the first generation of motors. The second generation of motors is what I'll call the Transitional Alpha Spec motor. This is sort of a hybrid between the Model 1 and the motor that would end up coming after that. You can tell because instead of the terminals of the motor exiting out the rear, they exit underneath. Now, the transitional model you can tell because the rear of the housing has this kind of like plastic plug-in section, and the brass, the bell housing of the motor is symmetrical all the way around. So again, this is the kind that you could actually take off and accidentally put in back to front, which is one of the reasons I always like to mark my motors when I take them apart if I think I could easily get confused. The housings on these typically have a serial number, and that serial number should go at the bottom with the terminals. And you'll find that inside these are pretty much identical to the Model 1 motors. They do have a plastic washer that is supposed to be installed right after the carbon brushes. These are typically very, very good quality, and I don't tend to find that these wear out as commonly as the earlier ones. The last motor installed in a classic SX-70 I refer to as the Alpha type. They don't come with a pink sticker. This pink sticker indicates that that someone has already refurbished this motor. This motor was donated to me in a lot of others, and the person that refurbished them put pink stickers to say that it's been refurbished, so you can just ignore that sticker. Again, serial number at the bottom. But this time, we have a different rear housing, and the bell housing has a little notch taken out of the bottom so that you can only put it on one way, which is a really nice upgrade to the design. Much, much better to do it that way. These motors also have heaps of little plastic washers that go either side of the rotor. So when you reinstall them, I mean, those washers aren't strictly necessary for this motor to function nicely, but you should note that you should be putting them back where they came from, ideally. It's not 100% necessary, but yeah. So these motors were found in all Alpha, Sonar, SLR 680 cameras. I tend to find these are the highest spec of anything released in the classic SX-70 series. They're very rare to find have failed. The last motor I want to talk about is what is referred to as a Mabuchi. Now, a Mabuchi motor has a different mounting system. You guys can see here I've actually added legs to this particular motor. But basically the difference between a Mabuchi and the standard Alpha Spec is the Mabuchis are just made to a higher specification. They're a little tighter in terms of tolerances. They are harder to take apart. It's like very, very difficult to separate the housing from the rear of the motor. The drive shaft of the rotor is also 2 millimeters instead of 2.5. So that means that the spring that connects to the drivetrain, the gear train, it doesn't actually fit. You can adapt it, but you have to crimp the end of the spring and then push it on. These motors were found in other model Polaroids, such as the 600 series, Spectra series, Impulse series, basically any 600 type camera that was like a box type came out with a Mabuchi, and typically they had a little gear on the end. Now it is possible using a Dremel to cut that gear off and remove it, and that's what you end up with. The Mabuchi motor does not have terminals that stick out. It is designed for a ribbon cable to be inserted into the motor. But with some little metal legs and some soldering skills, you can attach legs. I always like to leave them nice and long and then trim them down as appropriate. That allows me to adapt this kind of Mabuchi to a Model 1 or an Alpha at my leisure and just then trim the legs as needed. All SX-70 motors have rubber bushings. I've already fitted this Mabuchi with some spare rubber bushings that I had from a dead Model 1 motor. There is a smaller diameter bushing and a larger diameter bushing. These bushings serve to reduce vibration that comes from the motor. If you want to see what they do, try install the motor without the bushings and see how much it rattles around and vibrates the camera. They are really essential for the operation. And I tend to find that on Alpha Spec and Sonar Spec cameras, and especially the SLR 680, Polaroid changed the material that these bushings were made out of, and clearly to a cheaper material, and they tend to crumble away to dust. Whereas the rubber bushings from an SX-70 Model 1, they are invincible even 50 years later. They're really, really high quality rubber. I would say probably some kind of natural material instead of synthetic. And basically, you can adapt any of these motors to any SX-70. It's just a matter of getting them connected. And as I said, sometimes you need to add legs. You can also add legs, as I've done here, to a standard Alpha Spec motor so that you can attach it to a Model 1. This is something that you'll often find was done in factory repairs. So if you have a Model 1 that has an Alpha Spec motor, you'll usually see little brass legs hanging off the rear that a technician had to add in order to adapt them. It's very, very common. The unfortunate thing is these Mabuchi motors are certainly one of the best options. They are identical in terms of size to the standard SX-70 motors. They are incredibly high spec'd. They work really well once you adapt the drive shaft and add the little legs. There's one problem with them. They don't make them anymore. These are completely obsolete. They're no longer produced. I tend to salvage them from box type 600 cameras because I find these motors are so highly spec'd, even a 600 that's been well used will still have a really powerful motor in it. That's why I keep them around. So my stash of Mabuchi motors generally comes from like Polaroid Spectras and other cameras that have been broken that I otherwise couldn't salvage, so I take the motors out of them because they are so handy to have. You can, if you get very lucky, find lots of new old stock of these because these motors were used in model aeroplanes and little remote controlled cars and that kind of stuff. So it wasn't just SX-70s. Mabuchi is a motor company that made them for all sorts of purposes. Every now and again, if you get very, very lucky, you can find a big bulk lot of them if you really know what you're searching for. But again, they are new old stock. You have to get lucky for that. So wouldn't it be nice to have a brand new motor solution that you could still get off the shelf today? Well, they do exist. It's just that they're a bit mysterious. See, I've noticed for a while that both MiNT and Retrospekt use a brand new, different type of motor. I often have to re-repair, well, I won't say often, but I've had my fair share of having to reservice MiNT and Retrospekt cameras because clients break them or they arrive broken, like here in Australia, and the client doesn't want to have to ship it all the way back to the US. And so I've done my fair share of poking around inside these things, and I've always wondered what on earth these things are. Retrospekt and MiNT both appear to have gone a bit of a sneaky route, and there is absolutely no model number on these motors. In fact, if I just unpoke the motor here from its housing, on the flip side of the motor, and you may not be able to make it out because it's very, very faint text. I'll swing my lamp around and I'll see if I can get it to focus. But you may just have to trust me here. On the rear of the motor, it simply just says Retrospekt and then 230201. Now that is not a product code that comes up with any kind of usable information. And I've seen other Retrospekt refurbs that simply just label the motor Retrospekt with no other information. Now these motors that Retrospekt and MiNT have found are pretty much an identical fit to a standard Mabuchi. They are the same physical dimensions. The only real difference is the metallic lugs, which the rubber bushings go over, are a different size. The rear is basically the same sized lug, but the front is a lot smaller. So on a standard Mabuchi housing, I think the front is maybe like 10 mil, the rear is like 6 mil. On whatever this mystery motor is, they are 6 and 6 mil. So it's actually the same from side to side. And so to get around this Retrospekt 3D print little bushings in order to adapt them to the camera. The other interesting thing about the new motors is the terminals at the back are offset, like horizontally. They're not close together. One sits at the top and one sits down the bottom. So Retrospekt have actually designed their own little ribbon cable in order to be able to adapt them to different models of SX-70. Now, this rebranding of the motor, like clearly Retrospekt don't have a motor factory. They have to be getting these made somewhere else. And I always assumed that was the case, but I had a hard time tracking down exactly what motor supplier they were using. If you go on places like AliExpress and search for DC motors, there are hundreds of different models out there that you can purchase in bulk. And I'm going to assume that whoever Retrospekt found to supply these motors ended up striking a deal. Obviously, Retrospekt must have bought thousands of the darn things. And the company that's building the motor said, look, if you order X amount, then we're happily going to brand them to whatever you would like. And yeah, that's exactly what Retrospekt have done. This reminds me of back in the days of like early sort of 8-bit and home computing, where, for example, companies like IBM would often make a lot of their computing equipment out of commodity parts, like off-the-shelf components, to keep them sort of, I guess, repairable, and using as little proprietary parts as possible. Like I'm pretty sure old CGA cards and old like graphics cards for doing text and stuff were made out of basically parts that were already in existence. And a lot of computing companies that would make add-on cards were in the same boat, but that's a problem. If you use a part that is already in existence, other people can easily copy that and start doing it themselves. And so what I would find is, back in the day, if you had some custom card made by a very small manufacturer, often they would take some sandpaper and sand the top of the silicon chips off so you couldn't identify what the chips were. Was it RAM? Was it a bus controller? Was it whatever? And it was a pretty common tactic. And Retrospekt and MiNT seem to be doing the same thing. Now, to their credit, Polaroid's original motors never had any branding either. Some Mabuchi spec motors do, but it's pretty rare to find. But modern manufacturers of DC motors generally add a serial number to the motors, or a product code. If you search on AliExpress, you'll find that basically every motor that's out there has a code on it. So to get one that doesn't have the code, you would probably have to ask for it. Well, I am happy to report that after a long search and dozens of times of ordering motors only for them to either be the wrong size or the wrong spec, I have found them. And I'm going to share it with you today. Let's get the lamp out here and read it all together. What we have is a Mabuchi model FK-130SH-16140. Brand spanking new Mabuchi motors. Made by the same Mabuchi that made the previous king of SX-70 replacement motors. They no longer make this model, but they do still make this one. So what I'm going to do here today, I'm going to show you guys how to adapt and modify it to fit an SX-70. This one I've already done earlier, so this is going to be my sample to show you guys, but actually it helps if I put film in here. Listen to how quiet the motor is. And that's because it's brand spanking new. So I have here a chassis of another SX-70, and I thought that I would do this to a chassis just to make it a bit easier to see what I was doing. I've taken out the mirror and the Fresnel screen. This is something that I was keeping around for spare parts, but just for the purposes of this video, I'm going to show you guys how to adapt one of these motors. So the main thing that we need to overcome is really two things. Number one, we've got to get connection down from this top negative down to near where the bottom is, because there are two terminals on this. The one with the red dot is positive, and the other one that sits at the top there is the negative. Now, the side of the motor with the serial number is the side that's going to sit facing the inside of the camera. Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach a wire and run it down to about here. And that's going to put those two terminals nice and close together. If I was adapting this to an alpha, I might run two little wires, similar to Retrospekt's little adapter cable that they made. But basically, any kind of wire is going to be able to successfully adapt them. And so that's exactly what I'm going to do. Basically what I'll do, I'll flatten the negative terminal just over to the side to give us a bit more room. Then I'll be able to solder this wire on and route it down and coming out right next to the positive terminal there. And then the other thing that we need to do is adapt the rubber bushings to fit the new motor. Now, fortunately, the SX-70 Model 1 is typically the camera where you're going to need to do this the most often, because as I said before, these typically have the worst quality motors. It's not to say that they're all bad. I just think that when they were making the Model 1, certain batches of these were just rubbish. And I've seen a lot of times in my career that even after refurbishing these motors, they go bad in a few weeks. It's pretty uncommon that that happens. It's actually pretty rare, but it can happen. So, fortunately, in terms of the rubber bushings, the Model 1 generally has the best quality ones, so we can usually recycle them. If you have an Alpha and they've crumbled into dust and your motor is bad, you're going to need to completely custom make ones. So if you're good with a 3D printer, you can use that. Those that know me very well and those that know the channel will know that I really can't stand 3D printing. I just find it to be a technology that even years down the track is still very much, still too far in its infancy for me to bother with. I tend to find that the quality of the 3D printing that you can get at home, which would be what the kind of thing that I would be after. I don't want to be having to send away to third-party companies just to get small parts made. I would want to be doing it at home, and the type of 3D printers that you can get at home are just, well, I'll be frank here, they're pretty shit quality. The 3D printed stuff tends to fail after heat, it can separate, it can turn to mush. The finish is just not very nice. Like this is a splitter assembly for an Impossible project, I1. And like it's just rubbish quality. Like it's okay, I guess, if you're a hobbyist, but I just don't like it. It feels cheap, it feels like it's ready to break at any time. What I prefer to do is just use cheap off-the-shelf components. And so if you need to make new bushings, just go to your hardware store and get some hose. Here is some 10mm hose. Here is some 6mm hose. Use a little scalpel, make a slice, and boom, you've got new bushings. For the rear, we can recycle the original bushing completely as is. It's going to fit completely perfectly. It's a little looser, so it does tend to come off a little bit easier. If you want to, though, you can solve that problem very easily with our old friend, the tube of Quick Grip. And because the rear of the motor is sealed, we can literally just put a little dab of glue around that part, like so, and just fit it on. So it's pretty easy to adapt it. But like I said, you don't even need the glue because once it's actually held in place, it ain't going anywhere. But just for the sake of this video, we'll add a little bit of glue just to help keep it on there. And then for the front motor bushing, what I'll be doing, I'm just going to wipe off some of the excess glue here because I don't quite need that much. For the other side of the motor, what I'll be doing, I'll be using the original bushing again, but I'll be cutting off a piece of this smaller hose to act as an adapter sleeve, because as you see, this is a perfect fit. That bushing fits right over the hose, and all I've got to do is find my scalpel. Where did I put it? Here we go. Find my scalpel, and we're going to cut off a little chunk of this hose. And that is going to go over the motor first, and then we can put the original rubber bushing on right after that. So that's going to go on the front, and then the bushing over the top. And there we go. That's one of the hardest parts done. As I said, the rear, if you want to use a bit of glue, you can. It's just going to keep it a bit more secure, but you really don't have to. So that's step one done. Let's keep focusing on the rest of the build. Put that to the side. The next thing that I need to do, and I'm going to use my blob of blue tack here just to help keep everything in place while I solder. I will tin the little negative lead that's at the back. I'll just poke the wire through the little hole. There we go. Like so. And we'll just solder that wire right on. That part is done. Now, it's really your choice as to now how you route this wire. You can do it both ways. I like to route it just behind and have it come out pretty much where that little red dot is. You could choose to route it the other way and come up and underneath. It's totally up to you. I like to route it around the rear. I find that that works really well. But it doesn't matter. As long as you get it to where it needs to go, basically. That's the aim here. The next thing I'm going to do is just trim this bit of wire down to size, and then I'm going to strip and tin just the end. And basically what I'm trying to do here is just make sure that I've got pretty much two terminals that are going to be right next to each other, just like they are in the original SX-70 design. There we go. And tin. Great. And yeah, that's basically it. This is now ready to fit. All right, now I have the original drive shaft here as it sits on the original motor. Because the plastic coupler is there in this Model 1, I'm going to get rid of that plastic coupler. And I've got to do two things to adapt this drivetrain gear, basically gear. This spring that connects the two halves. First, I'm going to lengthen it in the center by about that much. And then the next thing that I have to do, I'm going to use my favorite set of pliers here. Not at the end that attaches to the gear train, but at the end that attaches to the motor, I'm going to crimp it and basically just flatten and sort of turn that into a bit of an oval shape to reduce the diameter of the spring, because I need it to fit over the new motor's rotor. And do it tighter than you think you need to, because then it's not going to come off. So yeah, we have a motor that is ready to install. Now remember, the positive terminal is the one that faces the rear of the camera. Do not get them confused. If you do, your motor will run in reverse and it will destroy everything. It will destroy your family. It will destroy your hopes and dreams. And it will ruin your day. Your wife will leave you. No, but seriously, it will destroy the camera if you run the motor in reverse. It will strip the gears and you will have a very bad day if you do that. Basically, I'm just going to use a bit of solder wick here to remove the original terminals here. The wire here is a little bit delaminating, so I'll probably just fix that up with a bit of Kapton tape before I go any further. And I'm just using my little drill bit box here just to keep the motor steady, because that's kind of hard to remove these ribbon cables from the motor while it's dangling. There we go. Great. All right. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to use a bit of Kapton to wrap up where that is delaminating, just so that I can secure everything. Where is my Kapton tape? Here it is. So I'm just going to cut like a little strip, just a little bit, just enough to just wind around that little piece. This happens on Model 1 cameras. If you're working on a camera that has like the later style waxed paper body flex cables, it's not going to be a problem. But this is like always the case on Model 1 camera. So just like a little bit like that, just above, and then wrap it around, and it'll just hold it together a little bit better. While I'm here, that little protective layer that protects the bridge ribbon also came loose. That happens all the time, again on Model 1s. I always remove it because it's so prone to fail that if it doesn't come off, I just remove it anyway, and I replace it with some of my own Kapton tape, just because it holds on a lot better. Great. Alrighty. So now it is just a case of putting the motors through. Now, depending on the size of the slit in the original little ends here of the ribbon cable, you may just want to split the end that goes over the positive little spade terminal here. That just helps it in order to stay in place. With the negative lead, it's very, very easy to attach because the negative lead is quite small and should poke through easily. But the spade terminals on the new motor might be a little too fat. It just kind of depends on how your cable is positioned. I'll just do the negative side first, I think, since it'll be easier. Because it's attached to a little wire. And then we can come in. Do I need to make a cut? No, I don't. But I will just neatly slide it on. And yeah, this is pretty much the final step. I'll trim that little bit of excess wire. And yeah, now it's just a matter of poking everything down and making sure everything goes in where it's supposed to. So the motor driver chip I will clip in first. Like so. And then I will loop around the rear bushing. And yeah, since this camera doesn't have any of its mirror or anything like that in, it's going to be very easy to line up the drive shaft. And get it attached. This is a little more fiddly with the with all the parts in place, but yeah, very easy while everything is off the camera like so. And yeah, that is pretty much it. I like to just come and make sure that yeah, nothing's bridging or anything, but that's it. Simple as that. What I'll do, I'll just grab a spare door. And I'll just force start this motor so that you guys can see it spin. And we can make sure that our handiwork has done all the right things. So basically, I have to just hold that shut. I need to bridge the switch there, so I will just put, this should do, just a little metal piece down there just to connect those two. And I should just be able to bridge positive and ground. There we go. Works like a charm. Super smooth, super quiet, great modern replacement motor. And yeah, if you guys want to hear that again in a finished camera, I'll show you just on the little Panda one that I was doing before. And yeah, this is my Laogama chili oil sauce lady shutter housing. It was the only one I had lying around for the video. I literally just assembled this morning. I still don't know what I'll do color scheme wise with this particular hybrid of a camera. It is a real hodgepodge of parts, but it works really well. It's got a Fairchild shutter. It's got a Model 3 bottom and long panel, Model 2 internal mirror, and then the rest of the panels are all from a Model 1. And yeah, it's got the brand new Mabuchi motor, which again is called the FK-130SH-16140. You guys will find that Mabuchi make a lot of motors in this same packaging and style, be aware that you really need to read the specs for the motor to see if it'll work. The SX-70 motor needs something like 9,000 to 11,000 RPMs at 6 volts. And the first batches of motors that I got were all the same size, but they only ran at 700 RPM, which was way too slow. Like, it was 1/10 of the speed that the camera needed. And so if you could get the motor to start at all, it was the world's slowest ejection. It was basically unusable. But these motors output, I think, around 9,000 RPM at roughly 6 volts, so they are a perfect solution. Anyway, if you would like your SX-70 refurbished, you know where to come. This is my full-time career, at least at the time of me posting this video, and I would love nothing more than to overhaul your camera. These motors, I guess from this point forwards, I can offer as a bit of an upgrade path. I'd like to reiterate that it is not essential to use one of these new motors, especially if your old one is in perfectly good condition. I don't personally feel that it's worth wasting money and resources replacing a motor when it doesn't need it. If your camera already has an Alpha Spec motor, or it's just got a Model 1 motor that works fine, there's no need to do this upgrade. But for those people where their motor has either torn one of the brushes and the brushes come loose so the motor doesn't work, or where it's radically oxidized, or the bearings have gone, or something like that, then these are an awesome, awesome upgrade path. And another way that you might want to do it is just, if you really want to be fancy, if you're already having me completely upgrade the camera to SX-70R PCB and Bluetooth and all that kind of stuff, you may just want to get one of these for the sake of it. Or if you want to make your camera sound differently, because, I guess, I don't know whether I'd call it an advantage or a disadvantage, but certainly when you install one of these cameras, it doesn't sound the same. Like, it sounds really different after you have it done. I've listened to enough SX-70s over my time to be able to actually hear the differences. And so, yeah, if you're a total purist, you may just want to leave the motor original. But yeah, I love that I now have my own solution. And yeah, I'm not going to hide it. I'm not going to shave off the serial numbers. I'm going to keep this information all open source, because if I die, so does my knowledge. So that's why I'm uploading it here to YouTube, so that you can all appreciate it. Well, that's about it for me. I think that's pretty much all I wanted to really cover in this video. I hope you found it entertaining and informative. As always, if you like what I do, and, maybe you don't want your camera repaired, but you found this information very helpful, please feel free to donate to my Ko-fi account. It really helps, keeps the lights on here, and, keeps me doing what I'm doing. Because like I said, this is, at least at the time of this video, I am trying to do this as my full-time career, as my main source of income. So far, it is working really well, but it's only going to keep working if you guys give me the support. If not, send something my way so that I can overhaul it and show it some love. And yeah, I guess the last point I want to make is, if you are going to do DIY repair, make sure that you're not just swapping the motor and calling it a day. Refurbish the rest of the camera properly. I've got so many videos that show you how to dive deep into all other parts of the camera. If it's worth doing, do the damn thing properly and do everything. You've already got the camera apart to that extent. That's the last thing that I'll add. Until next time, you guys have been a wonderful audience. I will see you in the next video. Like and subscribe. And yeah, most importantly, have a wonderful day.
Keep nostalgia alive.